welcome to West Virginia. My name is Richard Miller. You're at Never Not Here. Don't touch that dial. And thanks for being with us. You're certainly welcome to come and come often. And we're on the move here. Normally we're hanging out in Chicago, so West Virginia. What's happening? We just are coming out of a weekend where many people have gathered together and many people have shared. And there was a formal sharing, and then there was like an informal sharing, or I don't know, should I call it a solidarity? And people that have known each other for a short time or a long time welcomed each other and held a space that all of us could just come and be in and feel like that we could let down our hair. We don't have to be someone special or espouse any kind of special traditions or special doctrines or be anything special to be a part. It's an inclusive atmosphere. And it's called TAT, and Truth and Transmission. This the name started out and is still going, and different people had a dream or a foresight or a vision, and somehow this is a combination of those visions. And one of them was a man by the name of Richard Rose, Mr. Rose. And so we're actually finding out about Mr. Rose in a way, and by meeting people that knew him and have that feeling. And that's kind of like what has created this group. And it's pretty amazing. So today we're with Art Ticknor, so welcome, Art.
Thanks, Richard.
It is truly amazing here. So that you maybe you don't know it because you're a fish in the water, right? And so it's just normal, right?
Yeah.
And to me, it's a mind blower. I just don't, I don't have anything like this. I mean, we all grow up in a family, right? So we know some people for a long time, for many years. And in a way, we support each other. And mostly probably we support each other to be more like us. You know, you change to be like me. Parents to children, brothers to sisters. You know, but where is that freedom that where people are supporting each other to in a solidarity that just be authentic, whatever that could be. And so then I hear that, many people speak your name, so many people are appreciative, so then you're a pillar or a foundation of this space that's created here. So thank you for that. And thank you for inviting all of us to partake. How lucky you are.
That's true. And you'd mentioned Richard Rose, who was the first person I ever came across who talked about what TAT is trying to do, the general objective of people looking for capital T truth, you could say, capital R reality. The answer seems to come in accidental increments. And the big pie in the sky that we talk about, enlightenment, that seems to come in a big accidental increment.
Yeah,
it's a discontinuity, in other words.
Everything seems to be by surprise. Yeah, I've often thought about the discontinuity because that's what a special effect is. Waiting in your life for a discontinuity, and all we want is a discontinuity. We want the big bang, and we want to get rocketed out of this life, and we don't want this life, and we don't want just a one increment more or less either.
Yeah.
Because that's just too slow.
Yeah. Well, to me, I think that's positive. I don't think I would have gotten the satisfaction or the answers that I've gotten if I weren't greedy. So I look at the people who just, it's like limitless greed. I had so much of everything I should have been happy, but I was greedy. I didn't want happiness, I wanted permanent happiness. You know, I didn't want satisfaction, I wanted permanent, unaltered satisfaction. I didn't want love I had beautiful love. It wasn't enough. I wanted unconditional love that, you know. So to me, I applaud the people who are greedy.
It's amazing, you know. It's like not that many people have even love, you know. So then they're just trying to get over their last divorce, right? Without too many daggers, right?
Yeah. Well, and the flip side of the coin is I was unhappy from the time I can remember when I was a child. Anybody who ever said, oh, I'd like to go back to childhood or high school, I thought, oh my God, what a...
Are you insane?
Yeah, because I was miserable in my own skin from as early as I can remember. Yeah, so it wasn't unalloyed happiness that I experienced, but I'd experienced wonderful happiness and wonderful, oh my God, gifts, if you want to call them that, you know, like my wife and my children and my family, and, you know, from an outsider's perspective, I'm sure I've had one of the easiest lives possible.
Even your working situation, you had a good boss and good cohorts?
Yes, yeah. I was on a fast track with I stumbled into computers because when I went to college, I never studied in high school. The only thing that I did homework in was math because it was hard for me. The other stuff, I guess the teachers just like me, I don't know. But, you know, I just sort of glided through high school without any studying except doing math homework. When I got to college, I didn't know why I was in college. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I majored in math, of all the stupid things. So why did I do that? You know, it made no sense.
The hardest thing, right?
Yeah, but I wasn't.
You wanted a challenge, okay.
I don't think I did.
No?
I don't know. I have no idea why I majored in math.
But even math is not like something that parents usually say, be a doctor, be an engineer, be a scientist.
That's when people would ask me when I was, say, in high school, what are you going to be? I said either a doctor or an aeronautical engineer. Had no interest in either. That was just what people, you know, status kind of stuff.
Just a rote answer.
But you know, in retrospective, I think the reason I like math until you get into certain areas, was because there was an answer. I think that's what really appealed to me because I was basically working with my intellect, and you know, when I got into truth seeking, what I was attempting to do was to get my mind around the truth. I was going to swallow the truth I was going to get that all down into one concept that would fit in my head.
Just like you got math in your head, so you're going to do the truth
in your
head too. See?
Yeah. And music, Mozart, which is tremendously mathematical to me. Yeah. So I think that was my brain, you know, my mentality.
I have a science background, you know, as an engineer.
Oh, do you?
It's an electrical engineer.
Uh-huh.
And then not really very... it always was on the periphery, you know. It really was never very central or very loved to me. And then my experience with math is that we always did engineering before we took the math course because we were on a fast track to jam all that stuff in there. So I was always totally confused with calculus and stuff because I was doing it in engineering before I did it in math.
Oh.
And so then when I got to the math class, okay, I knew it already. But I mean, I knew it in such a rotten way.
You knew how to work the problems.
Yeah, but I mean, that just meant I was a real flunky as an engineer because I couldn't understand what is all this calculus and what is this stuff. We've never had that.
Yeah, I don't think I ever really got a good conceptual understanding of math, even calculus. I knew how to do it, but that was about it.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I didn't have I certainly had no genius for it, which I recognized by the time I was maybe a senior in college. And actually, when I admitted that to myself, it was like being hit with a bucket of cold water. It was my first wake up in life in a way. I realized I sort of dreamily planned on just continuing on through college, getting a PhD or something, becoming a teacher. And when I admitted to myself I had no great talent for math, I just did it by grunt work, brute force sort of. I thought, wow, it would be a lie to myself and to future students if I continued on and became a professor. And I guess I'm going to have to go to work, get a job, work 5 days a week, 8 to 5 for the rest of my life. And I thought, what a boring prospect. So that was like my first wake-up call in life. Yeah.
In a way, our generation lived like crap, you know, because I mean, we really bought into a story that we should fit the mold, fit some kind of a mold, you know.
Yeah.
And we really were suckered into it. I mean, even our parents thought that margin was the greatest thing, and that all these refined flours were really, science had really dominated nature, and that we were having the best food and the best, I don't know. And we totally trusted medicine. And I can remember even as a child, the moment, there was a kind of like a turning point when I didn't believe everything my mother and my teacher said, somewhere maybe in second grade, where I just realized these guys don't know much. And I was thinking that everything they said was it. That was.
I think I still believe that through college.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, not with my mother, but with the teachers. Yeah, I sort of worshiped the teachers. And couldn't. So I was just the opposite of Richard Rose in terms of mentality. He couldn't take anybody's word for anything. He had to find out for himself. I was, wholeheartedly into believing whatever the teachers were selling. And yeah.
So then our interest is we never have an authentic, really self. We're only fitting into a mold and doing it well or not doing it too well. And then those that are troubled in society, I was troubled. I couldn't speak. I couldn't write. I couldn't spell. I couldn't. I really was. I didn't have much of an interest or attention level. And I used to actually my hands would break out.
Wow.
I had some great nervous things that would come out of my, and then I had all kinds of boils and bubbles on my fingers, and they would be scratchy and itchy, and I was as a kid, and these energy discombobulations, and society didn't work for me at all. And then I spent decades and decades trying to either fit in, and then trying to rebel against it, and then
you were sensitive as a kid. I wasn't sensitive in that way. I sort of feel, although I don't know if this is just faulty speculation, but I sort of feel that that pickup from that direct pickup from other people is just overwhelming, and I just repressed it. I just wouldn't look at it, you could say.
What do you mean direct pickup now? Say that a little
more. When we're little kids, I think we're basically, it's easy for us to be in rapport, first of all, with our mother's mind, and then with other people around us. We pick up things directly.
We reflect.
Yeah, I guess you could say that.
You could say learning by imitation. We imitate, but not only monkey see, monkey do, but we also by moods and aggression levels and how we treat each other and the attention span and everything we're reflecting.
Yeah, the neurologists are talking about mirror neurons.
Right, it's like that, right?
It's like there's a direct...
We're tuned in.
Direct tune in, yeah. And I think for some reason and so we pick up on the mood, obviously, as well as, and mood may be primarily
baseline. That's all we
pick
know.
Up.
If everyone's tense, then we just think tense is total relaxed is this tension, right? It's an anxiety level, basically, how I see it now.
Yeah. Well, the mood that varies also. Anxiety to me is like static. So if you ask
in a radio station,
if you ask somebody how they're feeling and they say, I don't know, I'm anxious. It's like what I used to call it floating anxiety. If somebody would ask me, I'm anxious. I don't know what I'm anxious about. It's just it's general. It's floating anxiety. And now I look at that and I see that it appears to me that's like just static. And you have to somehow, either that has to evaporate or you have to be able to get below that to even get a register on what you're feeling, whether it's anger or whether it's sadness. Men only have, 4 or 5 feelings, so there aren't that many. Yeah. And so the mood, I think, is a child, and if we don't get too intellectual about it, the mood we pick up from somebody, we do get the register of whether they're angry, whether they're sad.
Definitely.
Yeah. And so I think that for some reason I have an idea that was just overwhelming to me as a little child, and I wouldn't look at it anymore.
So did you retreat to some kind of a fantasy world, or just go off?
I didn't have a great imagination, so I think that's probably why I found reading so good. So I would read, nonstop whenever I wasn't doing something else. Yeah.
Before that, were you up in a tree, or you were off somewhere, on your own, or in the sandbox? Or?
Well, I played with other little kids and things like that. Yeah, I don't think I was particularly a solitary child. I wasn't introspective at all as a child that I remember. Yeah, so I think...
we really don't have the tools to do that, to be introspective. I mean...
some people I talk to, it amazes me when they talk about what they were considering when they were little kids, like fear of death. It's very common for people to get at earlier ages. I didn't admit to myself I knew I was going to die. I wouldn't have argued with you, said, yeah, you're going to die. But I didn't admit it to myself emotionally until I was 30 years old. So I think I was a late bloomer in terms of whatever you call that, you know.
Oh, yeah. I didn't really take it serious, that mortality. I didn't take serious till I was 60, I don't think. You know, things moved so fast, and it just like seemed like, what do I care about that?
There's plenty of else to
That's
take
pussy,
your attention.
You know, I'm not like a wimp, you know. I'm not afraid of death, or, you know, I was just denying that.
Yeah.
Denying that.
Sure.
And just thinking life is eternal.
Mm-hmm.
Not from any knowing, just
right.
from a shut off.
Yeah.
And from a kind of a luck where not too many people died around me.
Yeah, I was the same way. I had a grandparent who died. Two of my grandparents were dead when I was born, and one died. I saw him one time, but I was 4 years old. All I remember is from his knee down. Took me for a walk, you know.
Yeah.
And then the only grandparent I knew, she died when she was an old lady, and so I don't think that's as shocking, probably.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah, so life seemingly has different plans for all of us in terms of what we get hit with, doesn't it? I had a woman who was a good friend of mine years ago who said she had a perfect life. She grew up in a little town in southern Florida, and her grandparents lived close by. She spent her whole time just running around, having a good time, nobody bothering her. And she married her high school sweetheart, and they had 2 children, and life was wonderful. And they were living in San Antonio, which is where I met her. And her husband was one of the first people who was working for I forget the name of the computer company, but a computer company that's
Dell?
No, it might come to me eventually.
Yeah.
But it started up in Dallas Fort Worth.
Mm-hmm.
Compaq, I know. Is it Compaq? I've forgotten which one, but and their kids then were young teenagers. They didn't want to move the kids out of the school they were in, so he started working up there. Didn't know if the company would be around anyway, you know, so they didn't want to disrupt their lives completely, and would commute back on weekends. And then pretty soon it was every other weekend, and then pretty soon it was once a month, and pretty soon she found out he'd fallen in love with a woman up there, and she was devastated because this was the love of her life, perfect. She'd never had seemingly any trauma in her life. So life hands it out at different times and seemingly in different quantities to us, but my suspicion is that very few people get through life without either. So in my case, it was more suffering, like erosion, that seemed to wear my ego down, if you want to call it that, rather than traumas that would hit. But I think very few people get through life without one or the other.
So in many cases, life is made up of expectations.
Yeah, sure.
So our expectations are the ones where we want the good parts to last and the bad parts to fade away.
Right.
And other people's expectations are that they want us to serve them in a certain way, or appear in a certain way, or not go out of a certain amount of boundaries, so that we don't shock anybody.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so then dealing with those expectations, our own and others, people's, and of course our own are insidious and maybe not even on the radar. Maybe that's the subconscious motivations that keep us
sure, some combination usually, isn't it?
Robotized, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a lot about what our trauma is and our depression is and stuff like that, is maybe our unconscious expectations, and even though the expectation is unconscious, we know as a whole being that we're not there, and so then it feels like crap.
Yeah.
And then the rest of the world is meeting other people's expectations, and this is a bad environment. You know, I got to move out of here. They're not accepting me the way I am.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we have to meet those expectations. And so somehow, if our level of freedom kind of shows that, you know, we can allow people to have a wide range of expectations and either fulfill them or not fulfill them, but not necessarily make our whole life about reacting to those expectations. And then our level of bondage is how each expectation ricochets through us with banging and clanging and hurting and pains, and you know, and then we register that as our childhood abuse and you know, somebody wanted me to do something, oh my God, you know, it's not right, it's not just.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've talked to some large number of people. I don't know what it would be, but I've heard this quite often, where people say, "I try not to have any expectations," because they found out when they expect something and it doesn't happen, then it's a disappointment. And so to me, that's more the mind's program, you could say, of trying to find some happy spot. I remember asking a guy who was recently out of college what he wanted out of life. He said, "I want permanent happiness." And I said, "Well, what do you mean by permanent?" He says, I don't want to be miserable from now until I die." And to me, that's not asking for enough. To me, I would try to get him to be more greedy in terms of what he wanted, because permanent isn't between now and when you die. Permanent is permanent. And if we're honest with ourselves, we don't have any idea what's going to happen when we die. It could be more the same, it could be worse, or it could be better. 33.33% each probability, if we're honest with ourselves. Even somebody who's had a near-death experience, they don't know if that's what they're going to experience the next time they have a more than
Closer
near-death.
to death.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So to me, permanent has to be beyond time, right? And life and death are just part of this movement. And if you're looking for permanent love, permanent satisfaction of any variety, it has to be before, whatever you call it, before, beyond, behind time.
Maybe happiness is a metaphor for wholeness. There's nothing needed. This moment is complete.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm happy, and I sit here, and then when we counsel people to accept what comes their way, well, that's a fertile ground for acceptance, because if this is whole and this is complete, then any kind of a variation on this is something that doesn't exist in this moment, at least. And so then to yearn for it is, in a way, a denial of what is, or what is my life. Actually, this is my life, and if I'm denying this for a better version of it, which doesn't exist at this moment, I mean, then that's unhappy. But that's what I say, like happiness could be a metaphor for wholeness. So then maybe
wholeness is another. So to me, yearning is a good thing, not a bad thing. Yeah. Yearning is basically our real self, the umbilical cord that connects what we believe ourselves to be, this individual body, mind, or however we would typically describe what we believe, if we even get to that level of description. But that yearning is the umbilical cord that's connecting this organism to its source. And when we feel the yearning, that's the longing to become whole, which is what we are, but this organism doesn't recognize it.
See, I'm going back to education and society and saying that we were forced into a mold, so we're not authentic. And that's the yearning.
This organism is never going to be authentic. So the authenticity is what we really are.
Well, authentic is not a fixed. It's a flux. Authentic to this second, authentic to the next second, And just authentic just means, I don't know what, not feeling like you're being, well, in a mold. You just feel like this ain't me, I'm not getting anything out of this life. I'm doing all the things that the mold said I should do.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have never seen anything in my introspection of the mind, or from seeing the mind from beyond the mind, as nutty as that sounds, that indicates that this organism is capable of anything other than reaction. So to me, authenticity, if we're talking about the organism, like you say, it has no fixed meaning. You could describe it. We each have to try to come up with our definition and then compare notes on it. But so basically, I think the best this organism can do is being honest with itself about the motivations that are driving any action.
That's what people are saying when they say find your question, right? In other words, your question in a way is
maybe, finding your question. So, like a lot of us are familiar with Ramana Maharshi, for example, right. and the old, I don't know if you call that philosophy, what am I? So who am I? Where did I come from? And where am I going? So the who am I part of the question.
Who am I, right?
But if a person is disturbed about not knowing what they are, which is wonderful if they are, but if they sit down or talk to somebody to try to if they ask themselves the question, who am I, what am I? Well, eventually the mind gets tired of that, gets bored. So the real question is the emotion behind that. And the question, the wording of the question is liable to change. But to me, the constant is that longing for wholeness, the longing for unconditional love, the desire for...
Yeah, but that's not authentic either. How could that be authentic? I mean, I don't want to go too far from what you said, because you hatched a bomb there when you said that this mechanism is only capable of reaction.
Yeah.
So then that's a bomb that we have to we can't gloss over that one.
Yeah.
I don't want to get too far away before I forget, but in the meantime.
Yeah, so authenticity, to me, the only authenticity is what we are. This organism, or you could say the organism is authentic because it's a program.
It's a reflection, isn't it?
Well, that would be speculation. So what the person who's seeking to know what he is, or to find the truth, or to find unconditional love, they can't afford to get too tied up in speculation about what that might be. You go from what you can see. It's all about being honest, the organism being honest with itself about what it's seeing. If it were, the organism would already be what we call enlightened. So enlightenment is basically, to my view, enlightenment is the mind knowing what its source is. So what we really are, the enlightenment's ridiculous. What we really are knows what it is. There's never been any problem. The problem is in this organism, which is robotic machinery. Advanced robotic machinery. And when we say I, this is the organism's programming it. The way it's designed, it can't have an object without an assumed subject. So this I that we talk about is an assumption that's built into the machinery. The machinery can't operate.
Well, that's built into language.
The language also, sure.
Language is what makes I and the subject.
No, language is
not the body.
Language is doggy noises trying to convey to the other dog, who was it, Bob Ferguson, the family dog, The language is just a very primitive way to try to communicate to another family dog.
Most of us worship it.
Yeah, me too. I loved language,
Well, you read all those books. You were worshiping it too.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, language, you could say, was one of my sub-gods. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that was life. To most people, life is language, or language is life.
Well, it's definitely...
without language, you're asleep, or, you don't show up.
Well, language is a way to stay asleep.
Now we're getting into the good ground here. Okay, the body only reacts, or not only the body mind, right?
Yeah.
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 Okay, I can see where, in the body-mind realm, there's always something that we're aware of, and there's part that we're not aware of. Mm-hmm. So, the flashlight is not very wide. The flashlight of our attention is not very wide.
Generally.
And so there's something under there that is still... as we probe or get peaceful, things bubble up. So that it seems like there's a lot of stuff under there that can come up. And so then in that sense, there's a lot of robotic action going on, because those motivating factors that are underwater, we don't know what they are.
Everything's underwater.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. When we talk about, say, the subconscious,
yeah,
it's a construct that we've created to try to explain how things work.
Right.
But if you watch the mind, you realize thoughts come out of nowhere, they disappear into nowhere. We don't know where they come from. But we have to have in order to try to put some understandable filter over all this stuff, we have to have a program that says, oh, well, the reason I did this is X. And we don't know if there's any causal relationship between something that occurs seemingly first and something that occurs later. It could be the way that the viewing mind, the observation platform is moving across a plane. The direction it moves across the plane, it only has a little aperture. It's like looking down like this as we move across the plane, and it sees something, and then it sees something, so it says, oh, this must have caused that. Right,
with that little aperture, it looks like that consciousness is linear, it looks like.
Yeah, if you watch the mind, people talk about multiprocessing. I don't think you'd see that if you watch the mind operating in slow motion, you could say, which I don't know where you'd press the button to get that, but it occurs sometimes.
Is it only language that's linear? And actually consciousness is not so linear, but when you language it, one thought at a time can be really concentrated on.
Yeah. I wouldn't know how to generalize accurately about this. So like you see a whole picture with the mind, don't you? So I wouldn't call that linear. If you watch thoughts, including decision-making, mental processes, thoughts are like a string of sausages. There's only one at a time coming under the aperture.
So if you're saying anything about that image, that multi-big grand image, as you say something about it, you're in the sausage factory.
Yeah, so that when we talk, what we're doing is we're like little children that haven't learned how to read without moving their lips.
With their finger, huh?
Yeah, so we're watching words appear on the screen out of nowhere. We don't know where they come from. We're watching them and we're reading them out loud. So that's basically what talk is.
Yeah, oral is very linear, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh. Although I guess maybe I don't know. I hadn't thought about that too much, but maybe singing or something like that. Maybe there's more than one.
Or more than one voice. You can have chords.
But the thought type of thinking is, I'd say that's definitely a linear process.
So most of us are in that linear world because we're in our thoughts, where we give our attention so much to our thoughts.
Yeah, people who are primarily intuitive feeling type, I have no idea what world they're in. It's a mystery to me. Yeah, so that's one of the things we find talking with people is somebody who may have a total perspective and has a mentality that's more intuitive and feeling. They can communicate with somebody who's more intuitive and feeling in a much different way than I do. So to me, it's all these organisms, these body minds, have limitations, mainly just from use. It's hard telling how you describe that. So you throw together all the genetics and all the life experience that gets us to this point, and you could say, well, the reason this guy is primarily intellectually focused and another guy is primarily intuitionally focused has to do with some combination of nurture and nature, right? I don't know what the explanation is. But there are obviously differences. And one of the things Rose used to point out is this idea of everybody being alike or having that as a goal, it works less and less well the more complex the species is. So the more complex the species or the machinery or some product you're developing, the more complex it is, the more variations are going to be, whether they're intentional or not.
Now you threw another big one,
about equality.
You said there's no conscious and subconscious. If I got you right, that's just it's a construct.
Yeah.
That's a construct,
Yeah.
And so then
thoughts
come, and we say, I don't know, they pop out,
Yeah.
So sometimes when they pop out deep and unexpectedly, we say that they were in the subconscious, and
Very
then
possibly,
sometimes when they pop out on the surface, we say, oh, I kind of knew that.
Right,
That
familiar.
was from my conscious,
Right.
That was familiar. And then when somehow we uncover an activity that we have or some kind of a behavior pattern,
Mm-hmm.
somehow we uncover that and we say, oh, I'm believing something that's true, and now I'm doubting that. And so there is that actual behavior can just disappear.
Yeah.
So then it seems like it had something to do with that structure that was obscure.
Logically, it looks like there's a good argument for it, doesn't it? Yeah.
And I would say in my own life, a certain amount of behaviors don't appear anymore. They don't show up,
Sure.
And if they do, they don't have any weight. They're just weightless.
Right.
And so then it seems like there's some kind of tendencies
Definitely.
that you can work with,
Yeah.
Or maybe you don't know which one comes up the moment it comes up. When you say I don't know where thoughts come from, you don't know about that. But somehow on the long haul, you can see that tendencies dissolve, and then freedom is more available.
Well, you and I might have slightly different definitions of what freedom is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people, freedom means something like I want to be able to do what I want to do when I want to do it without any resistance or anybody or anything dictating otherwise. But to me, this organism has zero freedom. So it's going to be illusory if we think this organism has freedom. It's free to react the way it's going to react. Freedom, in my view, is what we are. So that would be another word to describe what we are.
Well, if I describe freedom, I'd say freedom from our own thoughts. And, freedom from our own thoughts would be what we are, maybe. How about that?
Well,
Our thoughts are what we aren't.
we aren't prisoners of our thoughts. What we really are, there's no problem there. There's no imprisonment. There never has been,
It appears that way, though.
From the organism's view, there's a hell of a big problem. Yeah, definitely. And that's the only thing that really makes sense to focus on in any amount of detail, or to spend much time working at. So the other stuff, if somebody says, yes, I know the truth or whatever, the only possible value I can see, and it's got negative implications too, because anything that person says is going to be misleading to the person who's seeking to find that for themselves. But hopefully people pick up. It's like someone here last night said the word that came to them to describe what they felt the first time they had come to a TAT meeting was integrity. That there are people here with integrity. So there might be 1,000 definitions of that word, but they picked up a feeling that somebody had perspective and it solved the problems for that person, and that was good enough. If there's a possibility of finding a perspective that solves the problems, then that motivates a person to keep trying even in the face of seeming absurdity.
Say more about integrity. Now, exactly what did the guy mean by that?
Well, integrity. So you've done math. I've got a background in mathematics. Integrity is oneness, wholeness, and parts aren't going to be. No combination of parts is going to be integral. So integrity points back to what we really are at the core of our being, our true nature. And that's what we long for. This organism, so it's a strange setup in a lot of ways, because Rose's sort of metaphorical or poetic way of talking about it is the designer created a robot and got tired of having to move the strings all the time to get the robot to do its thing. So it left a little gap in there for things to happen sort of spontaneously with the robot. And that opened up this is obviously metaphorical, right?
But so he threw the strings down, and now they just kind of go by the wind, right?
Well, but it opened up. So since this umbilical cord is still connected to the robot, it's not the same.
So the umbilical cord is the yearning, right?
The umbilical cord is like fiber optics, and there are photons coming down this umbilical cord all the time, and it creates, there's an electromagnetic resonance. I know none of this stuff in any detail, so I probably got it all wrong. But yeah, it's probably a very poor metaphor. But so we pick up that vibration as nostalgia, which says we came from some place that was perfect and we want to go back.
So nostalgia just means something about us knows what home is. Otherwise, we can't have nostalgia.
Right.
And it's coming down this fiber optics.
Right.
I've actually heard that DNA is only like 10% about making proteins and 90% about receiving electromagnetic radiation. So
is that right?
It's the fiber optics, and so then it's not fixed in any way, but it is our umbilical cord.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think many people, when you start talking about philosophical self-inquiry, whatever we call the kind of thing that I'm into, or even a bhakti path, they'll recognize if you say home, and maybe put a capital letter on, all that turns some people off too. But this idea of home, this nostalgia, a lot of people know that you're talking about what they're pursuing.
God, it seems risky. I don't know, because you
Yeah,
can say any kind of
it
a
is.
yearning is home, right? So then any kind of like a program conditioning that causes dis-ease
Right.
or anxiety or squeezing,
Yeah.
well, that must be I'm looking for a home.
Yeah, like
It's
Temple
a very
Grandin.
honoring anxiety. It's a real. I'm not trusting that. I think it's a
Yeah.
false honor.
Yeah.
To say that
Sure.
anxiety-based seeking is cool, or
Yeah.
okay, or
Mm-hmm.
somehow I always want to say that anxiety and seeking is not real. I mean, anxiety is always going to find more anxiety, isn't it? Unless you go by the burstings theory, because so many people report that they burst, they gave up or they just failed or.
Yeah, I think there's obviously a difference between productive tension and unproductive tension, isn't there? So anxiety in many cases is it's an irritant that will keep the organism moving, and so maybe
It
that's
closes it. To me, what an emotion does is it's always closing something. And the usefulness of that is it pushes all the life energy to the fight or flight, the legs and the arms, and so then I call it protection.
Sure. Yeah.
That's a protection thing, and it comes out of fear. Fear
the
is an automatic contraction.
The
That's
personality
automatically
is a defense mechanism.
Yeah.
Our whole personality, I believe, develops as a defense mechanism.
Well, it's coping. It's a coping mechanism.
Sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Protecting. And what is it protecting?
Well, it goes to kind of like what we said when I was saying, maybe it was this, because I said like there's two kinds of expectations, ones that we have on the world and ones that the world have on us. And so the personality is a way of managing all expectations. The tidal wave of expectations that's coming toward us, we manage it with a personality. It's like a tool, and it's different for every society. And if we were in a different society, if we moved to a developing, nation instead of a developed nation, we could use a different personality, and maybe we'd be more heart-centered and it would work better that way.
Sure, the personalities would be different, but there's still a personality, and personality is the problem.
Well, thinking that that's us is a problem, It's
Right.
a coping mechanism that
Right.
can be useful. I mean, if the police are coming to me, I don't raise my fist.
Yeah.
I cope with them with a personality
Right.
that says, okay, you guys are the cops and I'm not the robber, so you don't have to worry.
Right. Exactly. It's that belief that I'm a person.
Yeah.
Right. And behind the keystone in the arch of that belief would be the same, I believe, for everybody, although they'd have different words for it and associate slightly different feelings. But it's the fear of being overwhelmed. So that the reason the defense mechanism or the coping mechanism comes about is to protect that core belief. I'm a something that's vulnerable.
I'm not so sure you have to believe in your personality to activate it. I mean, I think every guru has a personality. It might be arbitrary and they change it at will, maybe. But, a personality is the fact of being on the planet Earth. What am I, is that going too far?
No, it's, I don't disagree with that. It's not the point I was trying to make.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go for it again then.
Okay.
Straighten me out.
Well, no, it's just, thinking from the standpoint of somebody who's searching for whatever is going to settle their soul. The personality is the next to the last illusion, the belief. You identify it as the belief in the personality. It's not the personality per se, but it's being identified. I'm a person.
That's me,
yeah. So it's that identification with a personality that is keeping us from admitting the truth, keeping the mind from admitting the truth of what it already sees. So what it sees would contradict that belief in personality. And behind that is actually a more subtle belief in individuality. You can mentally, the intellectual seeker can pare his self-definition down past personality to individuality. But the mind is not constructed to conceive of a non-thing or of no thing. So if you say nothing, the mind can conceive of, an empty space, like a black closet. You can't see the walls.
A thing called nothing, yeah.
Yeah, a thing called nothing.
Yeah, like a bottle that doesn't have anything in it.
Exactly.
Or a black box.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the mind can't conceive of identifying itself as something other than a thing, and then
right.
earrings and shoes and things get appended to that, and I'm this personality with these possessions and these characteristics.
This history, these memories,
Yeah.
these relationships.
Right. Yeah, and so all that isn't false, but it's not what we really are. So it's illusory in that sense.
Right.
Yeah, so it's untruth in terms of the truth about what we really are at the core of our being. And all the problems are in this mind dimension.
Right. Now
Yeah.
that's cool.
Uh-huh.
That's cool to note. Take note of
Right.
that. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
but
the realm of problems.
yeah,
And so then it's the realm of apparent solutions, but they never really go anywhere because somehow you got to jump out of that context to have the permanent solution.
right.
And
Yeah,
know that you are already out of that context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's apparent progress. So like Hubert Benoit, the French psychiatrist who wrote The Supreme Doctrine, I don't know if you're familiar with him. I don't think he's very well known anymore. But he used an analogy. He said that progress is like on the horizontal plane, you can get closer and closer to, say, the wall at the end of the plane, the vertical. But self-realization is falling into the abyss or jumping over the wall or something. So progress is, you can seemingly get closer to it, but it's not going to do the trick. In other words, you can't think your way to the truth, you can't feel your way to the truth, but you can think your way closer to it, and you can feel your way closer to it by backing away from these more obvious attachments or identifications. I believe myself to be. So when I ask some people, what do you believe yourself to be? It's, I'm my mother's daughter, I'm my wife's husband, I'm my child's father. It's relational. So those things are, obviously those relations are true, aren't they? That this organism is related to that organism in that way, but it doesn't get at what we're looking for to solve this, whatever, discontent or dissatisfaction.
Well, I mean, that's superficial because what is a mother? We don't know what a mother is.
Yeah. But when it comes right down to it, that's the only way the mind can define itself. It has to be in relation to something.
Right.
Yeah. And so we get more sophisticated.
Often looks like an object,
Yeah. We get more sophisticated, but it's basically it's the same kind of answer, just less superficial. But there is a progress in a way, because my feeling is that when the wind blows and pushes you over the edge of the precipice, and we're always right on the edge of the precipice. So it's like Bart, when he came up with the idea, I don't know if it was his idea, but the words anyway, closer than close. Oh, honest to God, that's the truth. There is nothing, literally nothing separating, except maybe you could say a faulty belief, separating us from the truth of our nature and from enlightenment. And so
that was so cool. You said when the wind blows, it shoves us over the precipice, and so many people say I was taken by surprise. There was a gust, and I was on the wrong foot.
It could be tripping over this crack in the tile.
Yeah, right. And so we're praying for a gust, basically, right?
Yeah. We're convinced, for whatever our reason, God is so far away. Or finding permanent happiness is so far away, and I've tried this, and the older we get and the more discouraged we get, it gets further and further away. But the truth is, it's what we are, it's where we are. So how far away can we get from that, if we wanted to?
Can't we just love people, let them in?
It's really hard for many of us. It's easy. It's easier in a way. Well, and it's easier in a way to love somebody than to accept their love. Have you ever noticed that, or has that been the case for you?
No, I've often said, the main problem of humanity is that we can't contain the energy of love. We can't contain our good. We always walk away from our good.
Well, we aren't good. Humanity is good and bad in an equal mix, and it may the percentage may vary a little bit.
There's an energy of good. I mean, it's like, okay, it's the moment when there's nothing there. No.
Well, there's an energy of good, but if there is an energy of good, there has to be an equal and opposing energy of bad. There's nothing in this dimension that's pure.
So love is only of the mechanism of the body.
The love that the body-mind mechanism can
comprehend,
feel, or comprehend is partial. Yeah, so it's impossible no matter how much someone loves you or how much you love someone else, it's impossible for that to be unconditional. So this is the realm of conditional. The only unconditional is what you are.
So that's a dissolution of the apparent. In other words, I can't. My body-mind mechanism can't love because it can't be here when there's love. It's not. It doesn't show up. So then it wants to have
your
itself
body,
and love too.
Your body-mind mechanism is love.
So that means it can't experience it because it can't experience what it is.
Yeah, it's not absolute. So it can't experience. Absolute is beyond experience. So experience is in this dimension of ups and downs and happies and unhappies and good and bad and stuff like that. Relativity.
And relationships.
Right. And so all experience is relative. So any experience, you could say, no, this experience is maybe close to absolute, to good, good. And this experience is close to bad, right? And so some mechanisms are more loving. Yeah. And some mechanisms are less loving. So it's not like every particle is equally positive, negative, and stuff like that. But overall, the whole thing has to be, or all the wheels would start flying off, and the engineers would go crazy.
Experience is relative, you said, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So then those guys that say, or I don't know, is it only the presenters that say he had his final experience in 2004?
Yeah. So I think if you quiz them, they may have to backtrack a little bit and say the final experience isn't an experience, but all you can talk about is the transition to that and the coming back out of it. You could say, a crude way to say it is like the only way I could say it is when I came back into the mind, which is crude. It doesn't say anything really, but so that you can say, oh, here's what happened. I'd taken 6 steps and I sat in a chair and I was drinking tea and there was a discontinuity. And the discontinuity is out of time. But, and this happens every night when we're in dreamless sleep. We're enlightened when we're in dreamless sleep. This organism doesn't catch on. So somehow this organism, you could say consciousness, there has to be a channel of consciousness open while we're in dreamless sleep, while we know what we are, I don't know how you describe it, But so the mind, the channel of consciousness has to be open so the mind can catch a dumbed down version of it. So now you admit what you are, but you can't squeeze it into here, So anything that's said about it is back in this impossible domain of talking with relative blah, 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 or drawing pictures about stuff that has no parts, no colors, no.
So we can't say that's a memory, Okay, these guys have a memory, and then but something happened where something got fried, some circuits got fried or something.
That's the way.
So then it's easy to explain it like, okay, there was a conscious and an unconscious, and something in the unconscious that was kind of driving an individual somehow got totally fried, and it's not down there anymore. But we've already said there is no conscious or unconscious thing. Things just appear out of the mystery or something like that. What gets fried? Something is tendencies change, right? Totally change. There's something.
I rather doubt that.
Yeah. You mean behavioral tendencies don't change? But I mean something about tendencies.
Doubt it. Yeah.
Okay, then I don't mean behavioral tendencies, but something about the tendency to believe myself as separate.
Oh yeah.
That's changed. Yeah. Okay, and so something is fried. The circuits of something popped. And then that's where it's got to be stored somewhere, right? And we're not just saying, okay, I had a memory one time, everything was blissy, everything just kind of crashed and colors appeared and whatever, I don't mean to diminish it, I'm just trying to say that, it's not that,
right.
Some radical circuitry has been totally altered, and dispensed with probably. It's just say, hey, those circuits weren't needed,
Yeah, and it's not clear to me whether mind disease could eliminate that. So the thing I know is that if you cut off my head, it wouldn't affect me. And yet I don't know if I'd be able to tell you that tomorrow if you pump me full of lithium, for example, or Alzheimer's set in and started chewing up brain cells. So yeah, it's paradoxical. One time I heard somebody asked Richard Rose, are you always there? Or some variation of that question, And he considered it a second and he said, well, sometimes it's closer and sometimes further away. And I wouldn't have said that until maybe the last year. And now I know what he was talking about. So when somebody asked me that a couple of years ago, I would say, I'm there all the time. But now I sort of get a feeling for what he's talking about. So there's a paradoxical thing.
It feels very honest, when he said that.
Yeah.
Very, very
yeah.
honest.
He was not a pretender by any means. He was very, very honest. Yeah. Yeah. And so somebody asked one of the presenters here, are all your problems solved? I think it was Bob Searle, someone asked him that. And it would be very easy for somebody who knows themselves to say, yes, all the problems are solved, because the questions that I thought were important, I can see are irrelevant. But he didn't say that. He was more honest. He was trying to say, from your standpoint, I've still got problems. I've got mortgages and all this kind of stuff. And so that's a much more honest answer. You won't hear that from maybe a newbie person who's found what they are, and you may not hear it from everybody else. If you got a book to sell or something like that, you may not want to be. It's not dishonest not to say that, but it's revealing, I think. So enlightenment isn't the organism isn't going to feel unending happiness. That'd be hell. If you had to feel one feeling and it never changed, oh my God, you'd look for a gun, right? So the main thing that's changed for me, I think, is my reactions are largely the same as they've always been, because that's all habit patterns. Now that could change by whatever life experience and traumas and happy situations could change those to some extent. But basically, I think what's changed is this organism's reactions to the reactions.
Reactions to the reactions?
Yeah. So
what do you mean by that?
So in other words, if you frown at me, this organism's reaction is liable to be what it was 10 years ago when somebody frowned at me. And yet, and I might even feel it deeper than I did back then. I can afford to now. So I feel love much deeper. I feel hurt much deeper. It seems like a lot of that's been cleared up now in my organism, since there isn't any basic vulnerability anymore. The organism is free just to feel things deeply, and then it doesn't get cranked into all sorts of ramifications. So my feelings might be very hurt if you frown at me, or like some of my friends, they'll say, "Oh, you're making fun of me," and I attack people's thinking, and so whatever a person is really identified with, if you attack that, they feel they're being attacked. And so, and people I like, I tend to tease, which is not a good habit. But what am I going to do?
No, people have to get used to you.
Oh, well,
you
I
better
guess.
tease them more, so that then they can really see that it doesn't mean a thing.
Yeah,
right?
but it hurts, and it hurts me the same
just
way.
Just a wink of the eye. We react
Yeah.
to it, but we've been dulled so much that we don't really deny it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right.
Maybe that's my basic question. Why not just relieve the stress from the very get-go?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think many people they find it valuable to do that to some extent. Now, if you had no stress, you wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. Right?
You don't know that.
Oh well,
You don't
yeah.
know
I
that.
think it's a pretty safe assumption that. Why have you gotten out of the bed in the morning?
I don't think it's stress to come here and talk to you. Let's just say I was totally excited to come and talk to you.
Well, that's stress.
Is
Excitement
that
is stress. Yeah. Now, I don't look at stress as negative. I look at it as just there's this is a dimension of tension.
No, well, okay.
So
then
you're probably
saying
talking about like negative.
No, I'm talking about anxiety.
Anxiety,
As
yeah.
stress, okay.
Yeah. No, I don't.
Opportunity, I don't say as a stress.
I don't equate those.
Yeah, opportunity is what this was to come
Yeah.
here.
Stress is so far beyond anxiety. Anxiety is a little tiny example of what you might call stress, but stress is the guillotine hanging over your neck all the time.
Well, anxiety is on a continuum. It starts out as concern, ends up as full-blown fear. Yeah. But that's the anxiety formula, let's call it. The stress or the worry or.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so it's going to be hard for anybody to meditate or to contemplate objectively if they're tremendously anxious or tremendously stressed in any way, either positive or negative. Like so excited to get to do something, or I'm so fearful something's going to happen. It's going to enter. So yeah. So depending on the personality, the mentality, the situation at the time, so like even just watching breaths, something like that. It may be necessary to get stress and anxiety down to a certain productive level so that you can take a little break. But that all that goes back to a fundamental factor that until that fundamental factor changes, that the organism there isn't any way to control it. In other words, that organism may be subject to stress at various times that are going to be unproductive. And so you can take immediate. It's like from what I've read, people with depression now, the medical community is finding out that typically some combination of talk therapy, like cognitive behavioral therapy, and some medication tend to, for the biggest number, tend to be the most effective solution. So the medication might be like breathing exercises, and that might get you calmed down, so that then some talk therapy, whatever, talking to yourself or introspection is going to help. But none of that is going to last. So it's going to be ups and downs and ups and downs and ups and downs. For the person that we call the enlightened person, they're going to have ups and downs. If they tell you it's all blissful, don't believe them. So now they if they're referring to what they really are, then blissful is not a very good description of it. But it basically, you got to say it's not this. It's something unlike this. So you'd be more likely to describe it as love rather than hate, But any description is going to be misleading. So
there's our last thought, maybe talking about a thought.
Yeah.
Okay, because we said thoughts come, and then distinctions about how they come or where they come, or unconscious, subconscious,
right.
conscious.
Mm-hmm.
All those kind of things are kind of like overlays of some kind of a mystical or mystery, let's say.
Sure.
Like
yeah,
some mystery means we don't know.
Yeah.
We don't really can't say,
right.
with any authority or any.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, okay, a thought comes, and it comes like a train with one thought after another after another. But the moment we recognize it, do we have to get on the train?
Well, no, so now I think this also is different for different mentalities. In my case, so the vast majority of the small number of accounts I've read of enlightened people over the centuries, for example, that what they recommend is you got to stop thought. In my case, that didn't happen, and it wasn't necessary. So I think it's going to depend a little bit. So like for the thinking mentality, thought I found could continue going on over here without interfering with observation. But I didn't know that until the very final. So
well, that to me means you didn't get on the train. In other words, a thought comes up.
Right.
The idea
I'd practiced not getting on the train.
Is another thought that is like the caboose.
Yeah, and I'd practiced not getting on the train for years, which is there's a way you can learn. This is like the procrastination technique that's used against us, you could say. When we have to do something we don't want to do, the mind finds a way to procrastinate. Well, you can use that to your advantage, and that's if you're watching thoughts and you know what you're looking for is something that's going to settle this. If the train of thoughts that's coming along doesn't seem it's about dinner or something like that, you can say to yourself, I can think about this later. I don't need to think about it right now. You turn your head away from it and wait for the next train. You don't try to force thought. You can't force it, but indirectly, the mind can learn to control thinking to that extent. So that is not getting on.
And say that's a really good train, and I'm going to solve that one in about an hour.
Exactly.
Or later.
Yeah.
Or maybe later.
Right.
Not necessarily.
Right. I don't need to do it right now. I can get to that later. And
so then you don't get on the train. Right?
You don't get on the train. Right.
So then you don't have that same feeling. You don't have the feeling that accompanies that thought train, because that thought train might be that I have so many obligations and I'm not really up to it.
Right.
And I'm the only guy. Why am I the only guy that has to do this? And then my sisters and brothers don't need to do this. I mean, why do?
Right. Yeah,
I mean, it doesn't seem just. Goes on and on, doesn't it? Fair, Yeah. And then there's a kind of a deep moroseness about that. You know? So then you can say, "I'll get on that train later."
Yeah.
You don't have to deny it or say it's a crappy train.
There's nothing wrong with the feeling.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that thought train. It's just something I know I don't need to address it right this moment, and there's something else right this moment that's more important to me.
Or nothing. I'm just sitting now,
and
I don't need to do anything now.
Right.
This is my my 5 minutes off.
Right.
Right. Break time.
Yep.
That could be huge.
Yes.
Just to talk about that is huge, right? Because I think that how, the whole idea that something dead from the past is controlling me for 60 years.
Mm-hmm.
The abuse I received, and the
Sure.
hard life I had, and the hard ways that we were, and
Mm-hmm.
I was in a Catholic school, and they were so mean to me, and they embarrassed me at every change, whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
all these things, they're completely dead.
Mm-hmm.
But yet we give
but
them
not-
life at
not-
every moment
yeah,
because we
they
get
aren't
on the
dead to us,
train
are they?
again and again and
Yeah.
again. Now just stop, get it off the train, get on the
Mm-hmm.
train.
It almost, so this is another example of, you can see clearly what's going on. You can,
You know the logic that it doesn't work.
you know that it's, yeah,
You know it doesn't work
right.
worth a damn.
And yet you still find yourself caught up in it over and over.
Yeah.
So I had half a dozen, I call them pain balloons. I had at least half a dozen, or maybe a dozen things like that. The memory of, so it was something somebody said to me, or some embarrassment or whatever, and they were so painful, I didn't even want to remember them. And I carried these around for years and years and years. And one time I was reading the book that I mentioned by Benoit. He's a student of Zen, and so that was my interest in it. And he defined the word acceptance as looking at something with your whole being and deciding you wouldn't change it, even if you had the power to do so. And when I read that, I thought, oh no, my mind just started arguing with it.
Oh my God, no.
Because to me that says, oh, you're going to cast this stuff in concrete. It's never going to change. That, what a curse. But for some reason, I found myself writing a list of these things. In my mind, I couldn't have done this. I wouldn't have been anywhere smart enough to even think about doing this. But my mind took the first one and started going into like super drive about it, like fast computation, supercomputer computation or something. It was so fast. And I'd spent years watching my thoughts. I could pretty much watch thoughts in the speed they were going, but this was going so fast I could only catch bits and pieces of it. And the computation that popped out at the end of that was, this computer is not big enough to compute all the variables that have been involved in this, the size of my hands, or the way I speak or something, or the way that I said something and that person said something back to me that hurt my feelings so bad, that if I had been in charge with this computer, things could very well have turned out worse rather than better. So it wasn't acceptance in terms of I like it. It was acceptance in terms of bowing to the truth of if I this arts computer was running the show, things probably
You'd really be in a fix.
yeah. And then my mind went to, I talk about this, I mean, it's a stupid way, but my mind went to the second thing on the list. Art wasn't running this stuff, this program. And the second thing on the list was something else. I don't remember what those were specifically, but the mind went through a computation again about all these different variables, different situation, and came out with the same conclusion again. And my mentality was enough that something like that was convincing. I didn't have to go through 12 and then say, wow, maybe there's another example.
Yeah.
So I could say that is convincing. And what happened is I found like my consciousness going up in a picture. I saw something that was like a snapshot, you could say. I had a view, but as soon as, and this had happened at other times, and I called those things satori's. That's probably not even a good use of the word, but it was a discontinuity, a new view, and the view was instantaneous, and then my mind would boom, 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 start to try to describe it to itself. It's like it had to understand it, put it in perspective so it could put it in a pigeonhole and go back to sleep. And so the words that formed in my mind after this picture occurred were, from up here, everything down there is perfect as it was and as it is. And when that occurred, it was like a huge weight lifted off my shoulders.
Oh boy.
And
Let me just double check. I mean, I think you're saying that we blindly assume that we could live life better. And then when we really, really look at all the things that happened, we realize there's no way I could have even come near to this. I mean, I don't have the capacity to put this whole thing together. And then you start to accept that everything that happened had to be that way.
It wasn't even that deep. It was just more that if I had to run it with this computer, it could very well have been worse. So I don't know if it had to be that way. Yeah. It's easy when you look back. I mean, to me, I'm sort of a fatalist. I always have been. And when I look back, I can't see how anything could have been different. But I don't feel it would be honest for me. And I don't know if I can't speak for other people on this, but for me, it wouldn't be honest to assume that that's the case going forward. So since I haven't seen anything clearly that convinces me one way or the other, I assume that for me, the honest way to live going forward is to assume that maybe things haven't been woven yet. So I had a near-death experience when I was 35. I got caught. I'd never been in the Pacific Ocean before. In the first place I went for swimming, I got caught in a riptide. I'd never heard of a riptide, but I knew I was getting pulled out in the ocean. I didn't want to go. So I flailed my arms and legs just as hard as I could, as long as I could. And pretty soon my arms, the muscles were like spaghetti. And I realized this is it. I can't flail anymore. And when I did, it was peaceful. You know, I was hysterical, you could say, I think, during that time. But as soon as the mind said, this is it, these arms and legs aren't working anymore, I relaxed. And the next thing I knew, I was getting a life review. Apparently, this may have something to do with drowning. I don't know, because I've heard in the past, I don't recall any accounts I read, but of sailors getting these, you know, people near drowning deaths. And so it was like my view was going over the whole plane of my past life, like coming up a tree trunk. And I had the distinct impression that I could go off down any of those branches as much as and see as much detail of any of those life events as I wanted to. But I didn't want to, so I didn't test it out, so I don't know if that's true. But it was from oldest back up to newest. And I wasn't conscious of my body. I'd lost body consciousness. And after that occurred, the first thing I felt, body consciousness, I felt my knees scraping on sand. And I found myself, I'd say, at least an eighth of a mile up the beach. You know, so the whole time I'd been flailing, I'd probably just kept myself from going out, but I wasn't smart enough to know about riptides and what you're supposed to do. But so I came back to body consciousness a long way up the beach. I have no idea how long I was and why I didn't swallow water and stuff like that. But,
in other words, you were on the surface and stuff, but you were just being swept out or swept somewhere, you know, and then it turned out that you got out of it and you were swept back in a way.
Yeah. But I guess maybe it was sort of like a reinforcement of my belief in fatality or fatalism or whatever you call it. But I don't feel that way toward forward. Just I've seen that from, you know, when I was at the time to the past. Yeah.
Well, it's practical. Just what's done is closed. That chapter's closed, you know, and so then that's easy to say that's closed. And
but also the fact that you can see the whole thing laid out as if there wasn't any movement in it. The only thing that was moving was my whatever form of consciousness that was. It was moving over it. So it was like that past life. Now maybe that's also another. So I hadn't really thought of that. You could say it's already been written, right? It's already laid out on that. So it may not have been that way originally. Yes, I have no way of knowing that. But all that stuff's interesting, isn't it? It's fascinating. It can be distraction too. But
we talk about so much, huh?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. There's lots and lots of
totally
stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to me, I thought I was tremendously fortunate because, like I said, I was a slow learner. I was at this for 26 years from the time I met Richard Rose, and I had enough of those things occurring that I think that was probably part of what kept me going.
Maybe you lost the fascination for it, and then that was more easing up. Possibly.
Yeah, although, you know, it's like you said before about no burning interest in your engineering, and I never had I used to think, oh, it's great. A lot of the people I'm working with they're in love with, tied up mentally or whatever you call it, you know, fascinated with their work, and I never felt that about my work, and I thought it'd be wonderful to find something you were really caught up in. But I never felt like I had my hair on fire. I was more the just keep plodding type.
Mm-hmm. Are we caught up in what we're doing now? I say we because I think I kind of
the interview. You mean?
Well, and you and your interactions with people and me and making these little videos and stuff. I think my hair's more on fire than it was.
Is it? Yeah.
It can also shut off too, and then I can feel a tremendous relief and freedom, you know. So I know somehow.
Yeah, my feeling is I'm doing exactly what I want to do, and I don't ever feel that's not the case. So like there are household chores I've got that I put off doing, but in the past I would have been beating myself on the back for not doing the touch-up painting or whatever. Now I figure, you know, I'll probably do it someday. Maybe I'll die first and won't have to do it, but I don't care much either way. You know, it'll get done if whatever, you know, if the pressures are right and stuff like that.
Yeah, but in my case, I couldn't say that I was filling anyone else's model or mold. You know, I'm not really. You know, this is just something I'm doing because I can do it, I guess, or I don't know what. And then and maybe I can say it's leading to some greater possibility. You know, that I don't really have as a goal or a vision. There's no vision of it, but I know that I'm being prepared for what. In a sense, you could say that.
Yeah. Well, after I don't know if I've already said this, if it's a repetition or not, but after I'd known Rose for about a year, I was living in Columbus, Ohio, and I moved to Los Angeles. And so I came over to say goodbye to him, and I wanted to thank him for everything he'd done for me. I was so full of gratitude for this guy. There's more to that initial story that I didn't tell you. I'd be happy to tell you about it sometime. But he was like my father. He was the one who awakened the intuition in me, and I was so grateful for him for all that and for all he was doing for everybody, not just for me. And I said, "Oh, I wish there was some way to thank you for this." And he says, "That's not the way it works. Pass it on." And that I had no argument with that. So from that time on, it was very important for me to try to find other people
to share forward.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
I think that set a pattern. So that pattern lasted for a quarter century, and so that's going to continue on most likely until some other
That's a
wind
pattern
disrupts
not
it.
many people have, really. So many people
Probably
have
not.
have
Yeah.
kind of a thing like this, and they're used to it. It's not readily accepted. So they're used to a rejection on it, and so they're saying, "Well, it's not for everybody, and I should just, stay smooth."
Well, I was somebody who was tremendously worried about personal rejection, and it wasn't until the late '90s when after this acceptance experience that happened, the next thing I found myself going up to Pittsburgh, which is an hour and a half away, but were there enough people that I thought it might be possible to find some people to get a little discussion group started. And the first 6 months or whatever, every time I was going to a meeting up there, I'd be so worried that somebody would think I was nuts or just think I was goofy or reject me for any one of a million good reasons, And I was walking to the meeting one of those nights. I was going up there once a week, and I was walking to the meeting from where I parked the car. And as I stepped down off the sidewalk to cross a little side street, I realized the pain of rejection is worth being the person to stick my hand out first, rather than waiting to always get a sign from somebody else. That the value of friendship is worth the possible pain of rejection. So just little things like that along the way, seeming there wasn't any announcement.
That's the hugest thing there is, actually. To not just rely on reflection, but actually step off.
Yeah.
That the world is always waiting for that. And I don't know how you came to that, but it's a beauty.
I don't
It's
either.
a beauty.
Yeah, little things like that. I'm sure we all encounter them. A lot of times you don't see them in perspective until later on. But
Art, I've really enjoyed meeting you.
Same here, Richard. Yeah.
Really, totally.
And what you're doing is wonderful. It's giving a lot of people the ability to. So what Rose used to talk about is, he said the person who's awake needs to stick his foot out so that the person who's asleep can stumble over it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so basically,
just somehow make your presence stick out a little somewhere.
Right. Yeah, you're not out there trying to sell anything, to make a lot of money or whatever, but you're making things available that they're going to be. It'll be fewer than we would hope, but there will be, even if it's one person, I think it's worthwhile. That somebody's going to stumble over that, and it will change their life dramatically. And I'm sure you've already heard from more than one person that's the case.
It's many, and I always dream of more, because I don't know why.
Sure.
It's just like, I have a beautiful vehicle. TAT is a beautiful vehicle.
Yeah.
We're in these vehicles. Let's drive them around a little bit and show them off and shine them up and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And so find other people to drive them and, clone the fleet.
Right.
Totally. Thank you for this time, for this invitation, for running these meetings 4 times a year, and for just being who you are.
Yeah.
Art Ticknor. Thank you, everybody, for coming, and come often if you like it.
Thanks, Richard. It's been great.